Hello and welcome to a new episode of TechStream. Today's topic, System Change as an Opportunity, how RBB is reorganizing its post-production. And yes, to find out how this is supposed to work, I have two colleagues from RBB as guests. On the one hand, Patrick Westphal, and on the other, Carl Förster, both content managers and supervisors for the Cross Media News Center. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Hi.
Now, the media landscape is changing significantly and post-production is evolving accordingly, with RBB right in the middle of it all. Currently, post-production at your organization is set to undergo technical and organizational changes. Can you explain to me what role you play in this transformation?
I'd like to start with that. We originally come from file management as content managers. Our area is part of the post-production and design department, which consists of graphics, editing, and file management. And we're basically operational admins who monitor the workflows and serve as contacts in case there are any disruptions. And our roles have been somewhat merged from what was originally a Cut4D role into a content manager role. And it was decided that soon we would need people with a perspective who work towards Premiere, administration, and workflow. And so we were placed in this position.
Exactly. And at the same time as we were starting with Premiere, we also received this new tool from MoveIt, namely Helmut, which for the first time allowed us in operations to build our own workflows with this tool. That wasn't possible before at RBB either. Previously, this was separated, what we call Hamit, basically the support, or how should I put it, the people who set everything up technically. And this time it was us from operations. So we as operations admins were allowed to build things ourselves. We were allowed to get hands-on ourselves.
Exciting. You're currently working in a kind of transitional phase, as I understand it, with two systems. In the long term, production is supposed to be done exclusively with Adobe Premiere. So tell us, what are the reasons for the switch?
Exactly. As things stand now, we're still maintaining a dual infrastructure, which of course also requires double the support, double the effort when it comes to graphics, templates, workflows, and so on. And of course, the tendency or direction is, I think, also a cost-saving factor, but naturally also about what each editing program offers. The development is moving toward a consensus on Adobe Premiere, and all technical efforts for further development will now be implemented specifically with Helmut and Adobe Premiere.
Exactly. And at the same time, Premiere was essentially chosen because we will also be getting a new MAM in the future. And this is basically a cooperation between several broadcasters, two other broadcasters who are also using Premiere. So no more workflows are being built in the other direction. And that's why we also have to switch over.
Speaking of significant change, you just hinted that your professional roles have shifted quite a bit as part of this transformation, not least because of the effective use of the innovative Helmut tool from MoveIt. So how does this actually affect your work in concrete terms? Carl, I think you already started to talk about this earlier.
Exactly. So the work itself is also changing. So we're moving more and more away from those typical file management tasks we used to have, where we made sure a file was copied from A to B or had to investigate if there was a problem with something. Instead, we're increasingly transforming into IT. We're taking on tasks that, as I mentioned before, used to be handled by IT. But by getting this tool Helmut, it basically opened up a whole new world for us once we really understood how to use it. With it, we can now easily automate things ourselves and independently create workflows that we used to just think up and then maybe ask, hey, could you do this or that for us? And so on. Now we just do it ourselves because we've basically been given this new toolbox from MoveIt. And that's just because I feel like more and more everything is shifting towards IT, moving away from what we used to do.
And I have one more point to add. And what's also interesting is that in the past, of course, many system changes or workflow changes happened by simply throwing in a coin. We can now design and create these workflows ourselves. And on top of that, between the requester, meaning editorial or programming, and us, we actually have a DevOps team that translates the requirements from the programming side into the technical domain. This way, we have a much, much more direct connection with the programming team, with the editorial staff, and can implement their requests.
Yes, of course, that's especially important when requirements are changing as quickly as they are right now. The Helmut toolset is now based on a kind of stream designer. I think they even call it Stream Designer. With it, workflows can ultimately be designed according to individual requirements. Carl, you are now the official architect of stream design at RBB. So could you tell us how this came about and how stream design actually works?
Exactly. So how it came about, we started this, as Patrick already mentioned, 3 years ago, or almost 4 years now, right? I'm not even sure anymore. In any case, for us, it basically became a project. We got involved in this project, and then we received training from MoveFit GmbH, really hands-on training. I think it lasted several months with hourly sessions every 2 weeks, and in parallel, we started building our first streams. Over time, we grew more and more familiar with everything, step by step. And it did take a little while, I would say, until things really clicked, because as I said, I used to be an editor, worked on OB vans, worked in studios, but I didn't really have much to do with this kind of thing. I was interested in it, but never really had any direct contact. And as we kept learning more and more about it, it became that's the good thing about the stream designer. So there's not such a big hurdle as if someone were to say, hey, can you do everything in JavaScript by tomorrow? Instead, it's visually presented in a pretty appealing way. You have individual nodes that you can link together, and once you understand a bit about how the whole system works or what they had in mind, it's actually pretty easy to create something with it. That's what I wanted to say. And what's also an added bonus is that once you've understood how everything works together, if you then pick up some skills in JavaScript or other areas, you can do even more because you'll have more opportunities to automate things or pull in additional features. And now the hurdle is that the entry into this workflow tool is, from your perspective, I would say not really lower than with other workflow tools. And now all your colleagues from the editorial team are coming to you wanting new special integrations. At least that's what it sounds like. Exactly. Patrick, could you give a concrete example from RBB of the kinds of tasks that serve as the basis for developing streams so we can get a more concrete idea of what that looks like?
A lot of things are, of course, technical in nature, things we've come up with that benefit the program. Since we work in the news sector, in current affairs, where certain things have to happen very, very quickly, for example, there's a specific workflow. We have physical sound booths. The trend is increasingly moving towards recording directly at one's desk, but we still have sound booths where you can make voice recordings in peace. One workflow is that you can send your Premiere project to the sound booth, and while the author or editor is on their way there, the project is already open in the booth, allowing you to work very, very quickly. Of course, everything can also be done manually, but all those loading cycles, Premiere has to open, you have to find the sequence. Everything is optimized so that when you enter the sound booth, the current sequence is already open. You can do the voiceover, and afterwards you can also send the finished broadcast file to the VMS or broadcast server. Of course, some of these requirements are things we came up with together with our colleagues, and some are requirements that we continually clarify with the programming team. That means standardization of standards. Everyone has the same layout. We've standardized everything so that no one has to start from scratch setting things up. It's all been pre-configured by us. Templates, Premiere templates, motion graphic templates. Everything is where it should be, so you don't have to reorient yourself every time.
Exactly. I can actually add something to that. Even just when the user connects to Helmut, a stream runs in the background. And as Patrick already mentioned, it handles so many background tasks, so many settings in Premiere that we consider optimal. In the past, as an admin, you would have had to go to the workstation and say, yeah, you need to set this, you need to set that, all those settings. Now, all of that happens the moment the user logs in, so that when they open Premiere with one of our project templates, everything always looks standardized and the same. So every single thing, there are so many options and things you still have to do, is rolled out the moment you connect to Premiere, that is with Helmut Connect. This way, we also have less stress and support because we know, okay, everything is set up correctly just as it should be, and then we can see what the error is if an error still occurs.
Yes.
The Stream Designer is also specifically and thoughtfully meant to help solve immediate short-term challenges with remarkable flexibility. So, whereas in the past, you might have had to formally open a support ticket and then patiently wait, perhaps for an extended period, hoping the manufacturer would genuinely and effectively help you out with your particular issue. The Stream Designer is intended to offer more flexibility in that regard. Is there an example of how such short-term challenges can be solved in practice? No, I would say not really any examples. The thing is, we are independent. We simply have a toolbox. So Move has provided us with a toolbox that, as I mentioned before, allows you to do anything. If you want to, you can do everything with it. And whether it's a change, say someone tells me they want to export something towards Knowledge, but now they want it done for Blue Sky instead, they've started posting things there, and Blue Sky expects the file to be in a certain format. It can't be longer than 1 minute, if I remember correctly, and it can't be larger than 40 megabytes. And there, we pretty quickly, I'd say in about half a day or so, just built an export process for our colleagues. And from then on, they didn't have to do anything complicated anymore. They just had to press a button and the exact file they wanted came out the other end. And at the same time, we also checked, okay, if a colleague has a video that's longer than 1 minute, then we warned them and said, hey, your file is longer than 1 minute. Just keep that in mind. So we spent half a day building this, and now our colleagues no longer had to fiddle around themselves wondering, what codec do I need? How big can it be? Instead, just one click and you're done. That's an example of something we built again fairly quickly just recently.
And how exactly does it look now from a comprehensive, holistic perspective, especially in its interaction with the broader RBB system landscape? Does this particular system integrate just as seamlessly and effortlessly there, or is that perhaps a bit more of a significant challenge?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean integrating with the other systems or in that direction?
Yes, I mean the seamless integration of the helmet system into your existing RBB broadcasting system.
We have that as well, exactly. At the moment, we still have VPMS 2.0, and back then, as part of the project, we had something developed for us so that we can even export things directly from Helmet, that is from Premiere, from the Helmet panel, into VPMS. So basically, we export it, it ends up there, and we get an ID back. We built that. Then we also built an interface to our Digger system. We can export things from the system directly to Diggers. We also built an interface to our online CMS. At the moment, we're still using AM. We can also export directly from Premiere routed through the Helmet panel. We even built something that allows us, so that's still kind of a trial run where we can send things to Pro Tools, but for that, it wasn't just out of the box with Helmet. We actually had to build some additional components around it, but Helmet is such an important link in this whole workflow. We've connected that as well. Additionally, what we also have is an interface to Swotio. That's a publishing platform for social media. But we can also do that, meaning we can send a file directly from Premiere to it, and then the editor or author can post it from there to whichever channel they want. We've integrated that as well. I would say that with all the systems we currently have, we can address them directly from there, or at the very least, we can export to them.
Yes, it sounds a bit like Helmut is the so-called glue that connects all the elements of a post-production environment together. If other media companies were interested and said, that all sounds wonderful, but we're not sure who should ultimately take on these tasks, who can actually put these streams together. From your perspective, what kind of skill set would the colleague who should take this on need to have? And would this be something you could learn intuitively, or would you really need to dive in and study it more intensively?
Well, you definitely need to familiarize yourself with it thoroughly. I think there are always two options. You can have the manufacturer build and implement the streams for you. We made a clear decision that we wanted to learn these skills ourselves and receive training together from the manufacturer simply to get certain things done. And apart from that, of course, there are also a lot of resources on GitHub and from Adobe as well, which you can't just figure out on your own. You definitely need specific commands for certain functions. But overall, it's a learning process that definitely, I'd say, especially since there are also infrastructural aspects involved, like where certain data is stored, means that it's not just up to us to decide, but we also have to communicate with the organization and coordinate. And of course, we also have the cross-media systems that manage both the hardware components and the update cycles for us. And the reason for this is that when an individual user does an export, it's no longer processed on their own computer, but rather by render farms and render engines in the background that handle these processes. That's why, in the end, it's quite a complex interplay between the people who program the workflows and the people who interact with the program. I would say we've grown into this role quite well because we were able to actively shape what our role should look like, and we definitely benefited from our skills in that process. Not everyone here can program, not everyone has experience with XTendScript, but we definitely benefit from the fact that everyone brings their own expertise to the table.
Exactly. I can also say specifically, you really need to have some knowledge of post-production, how it works, basically that's what Patrick and I had already learned before, knowing what systems exist, how they work, all the files, and these basic skills. You really need those to understand everything. And then I think definitely an affinity for technology, but I believe you always have that if you go into a job like this, and you really have to put in the effort. You can't just do 3 training sessions and then know how everything works. But the nice thing is, it's really a learning by doing process. You just do it, you start small and keep building up, and you keep running into new limits. And that's where Move It comes in as well. Back then, if we ever got stuck, we would ask, we've made it to this point, but now we don't really know how to proceed. And then they're there right away to help you, and then you understand the next step. It's like climbing stairs. At some point, you climb the stairs, and eventually it gets easier and easier, and then everything just makes sense to you, like with anything you deal with regularly, I think. And what's also different for us compared to other companies is that we have people here like Patrick and me who work on the front end, so we handle streams, workflows, and all that. But we also have what we call the helmet admins. They handle the back end. For us, that's separated. They're responsible for the entire server infrastructure. I think in smaller companies, that could all be handled by one person. For us, it's just historically developed that way, so basically things like server management are handled by a different department, but all the building and development is in our hands.
Okay, Carl, you have already gotten a little bit ahead of me because I was just about to segue into saying that a comprehensive system decision, such as the one you are currently facing, truly depends a great deal on the extensive support provided by the respective manufacturer, especially when you happen to hit a dead end or are unsure of how to properly proceed. So, your overall experience with Move It was quite satisfactory in that particular regard, or do you happen to have any specific suggestions for significant improvement at this precise point in time?
No. So in the first phase, we had our regular meetings, which have been going on for quite a while, and you could always bring up your questions right away. And even in between, we actually already have such close contact with some colleagues that if we get stuck somewhere, we can just message them on Teams, so to speak. Even if that's not the officially agreed upon way, we get along so well that we can just sort things out like that. And if it's something bigger or something that needs to be documented, then we just handle it with tickets. But even then, it's taken care of quickly. So it's always like, actually, I think it's great the way things are right now.
Okay. Before I let you go, we've already been chatting for 20 minutes. I have one last question for you, which we haven't touched on yet. Now, of course, when you take on a project like this, where the entire post-production system is to be completely overhauled and new systems are being introduced, in a large media company like RBB, of course, there's bound to be a bit of unease at first about what exactly is going to change. Could you maybe explain to your colleagues at RBB why your editors, the technical decision makers, or even management don't need to worry? Or rather, why it's a good idea to switch to the new system now?
I think there are several reasons. On the one hand, we can see, though I think this is true for almost all professions these days, that roles are changing. And even with us, people who previously only worked editorially are suddenly sitting in the editing suite. And in addition, we're of course switching from editing program A to B, and I think there's also a question of acceptance. Someone who has worked with one editing program for 20 years naturally wants to have the same level of comfort with the new one. And of course, we're working to make that possible as well as we can. Of course, there can always be setbacks from time to time, and even such a system isn't infallible, but I would say that from a support perspective, we are extremely fortunate to have a system that works so well and is so stable. That means, as things stand, we wouldn't change anything about it. Our support needs are very manageable, and I think that our colleagues now have a very good understanding of what we do, the scope in which we do it, and sometimes even take on additional tasks. So there is also a certain level of trust in our role as supporters.
Yes, I can only agree with that. I mean, right now there's a huge transformation happening at RBB. It's not just that we're moving from A to B, but we also have this whole new MEM system. The VPMS is also basically being updated. So maybe it's actually a good thing that we're just starting everything from scratch now, because in the end, everything is new, and maybe it's the right time to finally get rid of some old burdens, at least from a technical perspective. Things that didn't exist back then, and now maybe we can streamline and improve everything, and maybe even support the support team a bit better as a result. And what's also important is to be able to act more agilely, to respond more quickly to new production environments or production requirements, and not to be stuck in the mindset of, yeah, we could do it that way, but no, that's not possible. We don't have to use some weird convoluted workflows anymore, but instead, no, we can just do it like that. With Helmut, for example, we can simply build this workflow ourselves now, and you just have to put in some effort once, and then it's basically done. That's the only advantage I see. There will always be problems with such a transition, or there will always be something you don't like, but I don't think the perfect system exists anywhere in the world yet. I wish it did, but I don't think it does.
I really don't think it exists. I definitely think your drive is great. I truly think it's exceptionally good that you are so willing to tackle something significant here and are actively helping RBB to smoothly make this crucial transition into the new, increasingly connected, and profoundly digital world. Carl, Patrick, thank you both so very much for generously taking the time to speak with me at length about your ambitious plans. I am genuinely keeping my fingers tightly crossed for your continued success, and I sincerely thank you for your valuable time and insightful contributions.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the interview as well.